Good morning, Ludmila. I'm speaking to you today from Geneva. You're at your home as well. And what we want to do today is conduct an interview about your work as an interpreter of Ukrainian. Now, for reasons which we don't need to explain, Ukrainian is in demand these days. We needn't, in this short interview, go into the political reasons as to why. I think there are plenty of other people offering their opinions on that. But I think it's interesting because I think you could say that there's been a slight reshuffling of the language cards over the last year, and that's of interest to colleagues. So, as we said, good morning. Perhaps you could first start by telling us a little bit about yourself, where you trained, how you became an interpreter, just some general background.
Good morning, Phil, and thank you for having me here. It's really a pleasure and kind of stress as well, because since I am the first interpreter in Ukrainian language to be interviewed, and of course, we all understand reasons why interest for Ukrainian language grew up so unfortunately due to very negative reasons. So if you have time, I can talk hours about me, but let's be very short. So I was born in Lviv, that's in Western Ukraine. I grew up there. I went to the university, studied foreign languages. Then I moved to Panama. It's Republic of Panama, completely on a different side of the globe. So after 10 years in Panama, I moved to the United States of America. I stayed for quite a bit, almost 25 years in New York. And since 2008, late 2008, I reside in France. Paris. So a little bit more, how did I become interpreter? That's really what I wanted to do always, since still being at school, I didn't even imagine doing anything else. And I already had my first job when I still was at the university. So getting the job for me was not a problem. I already was interpreting while still studying. So, but then after Perestroika, things changed. So I moved to Panama. There, I didn't do much interpreting because, telling you the truth, when I moved to Panama, the only two words I knew in Spanish was Buenos días y hasta luego. So I started really from zero there learning Spanish. And now it's really my first language. That's what I speak at home. That's what my children grew up with. So, but then in the United States, when I became a full-time freelance interpreter, and it's just happened to be that when I moved there, I started to, of course, apply to different agencies, private markets to be an interpreter. And there was one lady who always asked me to interpret into Ukrainian, Russian, or Polish. And I always would tell her no, because I was trained to be a German interpreter, German, English, something like that. So I couldn't even imagine interpreting into my own language. It's like, I didn't train for that. But then one day she called me and said, okay, if you right now tell me no, I won't call you anymore. And I told her yes. And that's when it started, really. I then became the full-time interpreter. And furthermore, then I became a contractor for the language services, it's US Department of State. And also a lot of help to be like trained. I already was a practicing interpreter, but I liked it a lot. It's a Cambridge University conference interpreting course. I did it in 2001. And, we had wonderful professors there. Mostly these were the NATO staff interpreters. And no, wonderful group of instructors. And I even didn't imagine at that time, in 2001, that not even 10 years later, I would become myself a freelancer for NATO. So that's in short.
Thank you. From what you said then, when you began work as an interpreter, you were working with German. Is that what you said? Did I understand you correctly? Okay. Right. And presumably in the past, you also worked into Russian. I mean, I suppose you're a bilingual, you're a AA Russian-Ukrainian, I would assume.
Right. Yeah. That's correct. Being from the former Soviet Union, Russian, that was a must language. That was the language that we all spoke. even though I grew up in the Ukrainian family and, with the background, because since I'm from Western Ukraine, on the side of my father, I have a Polish blood, so to say. So Polish was also one of my languages. But yes, Russian, of course, is my A language completely. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think the same happened with some of our colleagues from the Baltic states as well. They would speak their own Latvian, Lithuanian, but a lot of them, I think, had Russian as well as a native language. Would it be fair to say that you learned by doing, really, with interpreting, that as you got more experience and that's how you learned, rather than going to a formal interpreting school?
That's correct, yes. Because when I studied German, we did some interpreting and translating, but it was very short, just for 1 year. So it's not formal training. Okay. Yeah, it's just what I love doing. And I think that helped a lot as well, because that's what I was targeting my life toward. I wanted to do that. And also, knowing some languages, it's helped a lot as well. Especially in the United States, when I started, as I mentioned, my working languages mostly that were Russian, really, Spanish, which is very demanded in the States, Ukrainian and Polish, not German. German, I'm completely frank with you. German now, it's somewhere in the background. It's I even consider my C language, because I don't work with German at all. And you have to be considering it seriously. You cannot have at the same level all your languages. So I'm targeting myself toward the Slavic languages. My active working languages, Ukrainian, Russian, then very active B+, that's English and Spanish. And unfortunately, German became my C language, Polish and French now. I just added French. I mean, it's really my last language that I learned.
I think all interpreters would find that. I think to some extent, over a career of interpreting, your markets choose you. You find that that's what the demand is for. Could I turn now to ask you, now that you're working and I have to say acquiring a good reputation for Ukrainian, what are your main meetings? I mean, who are you basically working for?
Practical last year, no private market at all. Mostly that's international organizations. Main clients, European Union. I work mostly for the European Parliament, then NATO, OECD, International Criminal Court, and quite often Eurojust. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And are there any particular challenges that you face? I mean, with working with I suppose what we could say is a relatively new language in terms of international exposure.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's a new exposure for me, because that's what I have done throughout the years, and mostly for the European institutions and NATO. I did work only as an Ukrainian interpreter. So that's really not new to me. So.
Okay. Well, turning to a more personal note, what was your experience of February the 24th of last year?
Well, look, that's a really very important question that you ask, because it's something that I wish I never would have, lived through. I was in shock. My husband woke me up that morning and very seriously asked me that I must watch something. And what I saw on TV, it was really beyond any wild imagination, even though, we all heard rumors that it might happen, since Russia was practically already surrounding Ukraine at the time. But still, you couldn't believe it when it really happened. I turned numb. I was like frozen. I just sat in front of that TV and I cried. I cried. I couldn't stop crying. I was really glued to that TV screen. Like, I was hoping that's not true. It's just some horror movie that will stop. And that was kind of hard, because for me at that point, that the life as we knew it in Ukraine, it didn't exist any longer. So that's I was calling my family, even though they all in Western Ukraine, and at that point that they were not in immediate dangers. At that point, now everyone is in danger, of course. It was very difficult for me. I was really I thought I would go mad because completely insane. You watch that and you couldn't do anything, and that point you need to do something. How can I help? What can I do? So, when a colleague of mine offered me to join the group of freelance interpreters, mostly the interpreters based in Ukraine, they organized a group network to interpret as a volunteer interpreters on Ukrainian news TV marathon, like United 24. So I immediately became their volunteer interpreter. It helped me. It helped me to grasp reality, and it helped me just to live through all this. And
it helps to do something, presumably.
Right.
It's the way you describe it, that scene unfolding in front of your eyes and you can do nothing. It's the very definition of tragedy, isn't it?
Of course. Yes, that's a tragedy. That's a tragedy not of one person, one family. It's a tragedy of the entire nation. It's a tragedy because a nation needs to find a way to survive,
Following on from that, what's it? I mean, it must be mentally very draining, very, very stressful for you to do some of the work that you're doing. How do you cope?
Oh, it's not easy. Sometimes when I interpret, you have to stop for a moment because something is here. Sometimes the speaker is crying when she describes the horrors she had to survive, and you have to interpret that coherently. Of course, you shouldn't cry with her, but still, you are a human being, so you really live through it. It's not easy. It's not easy. But sometimes I feel also guilty because I'm not there. I'm not with my people. Ukraine suffers, so that's why I'm doing what I can. Not only working as an interpreter, I also volunteer. I assist. I have my family members, 3 people from Ukraine. They are with us now in France. So, but you could not completely understand what's going on in Ukraine if you don't see it. There is a proverb that's really perfect. One picture is worth 10,000 words. Also, seeing is believing. And that's what happened to me. Last year in May, I was in Kyiv, Bucha, and Borodyanka. So I saw it with my own eyes. That was really a turning point in my life, because whatever we think that problems we have, believe me, we do not have any problems.
Yes, it does put our other issues into perspective, doesn't
Right.
it? I'm assuming that you've interpreted President Zelensky.
Yes, I did.
I
did
recently.
recently.
I think people find him a very kind of compelling character, if I could put it that way. I mean, what's it like without, obviously we have to be careful what we say in public, but what's it like to interpret him? Is there any foibles, anything he does, anything? And also, does his actor training, because I think he did drama school presumably, so he was an actor in the past. Does that help him in his public speaking skills?
First of all, I would like to say that during this last year, myself personally, I interpreted President Zelensky several times, and we all did. If you think about it, practically, I don't think there is even one professional Ukrainian interpreter that did not interpret for President Zelensky in different forms and formats. Yeah, online mostly, because at the beginning, of course, he could not travel. And what he did recently, that's also shows him as a very courageous man. But it's one thing to interpret him, watching him on screen, online, and or even being somewhere far away in a booth and watching him down there speaking. but it's completely different to be standing next to him. No, really, it still feels like surreal. Did it happen really? Yes, but that's kind of personal feeling, not professional. But okay, his actor training makes him an effective public speaker. Of course it does, because he knows how to talk to people, and he knows how to reach their hearts. But an actor, when it's an actor, the actor plays a role. The actor is acting, but Mr. Zelensky does not play the role of the president anymore as he did in his movie. He is the president. You can see it, you can feel it. Look at him. He's a tired person, tired of this war, probably tired of speaking to everyone in this world, trying to convince the world leaders that Ukraine needs military assistance, humanitarian assistance, that Ukraine defends not only Ukraine, but the entire democratic world practically, yeah? So, and you can also see that he is sincere in what he's saying. He loves his country. Please name me how many presidents during such a terrible crisis stayed in the country, didn't go into exile, pretending to be a great president, but President Zelensky stays in the country. He is in Ukraine. He is with his people. So I think he is a great inspiration for them.
Noticed he's been to several national parliaments around the world, or either in person or remotely, and he seems to tailor his message to that country's concerns. I know when he spoke to the British Parliament, he kind of used slightly Churchillian tones and a message, which struck me as quite a clever thing to do. I suppose that's also part of his training. He does seem to be quite a master of public relations.
Yeah, that's correct. That's why that's what I mentioned at the beginning. Being an actor helped him, but he's completely sincere in what he is doing. I think he is the only president, with the exception of President Roosevelt, that speaks to his people every evening, each and every evening for a year, already more than a year. That's incredible. Huh? That's a courage. That's a really says something about this man.
I'm going to pick up on a point you made. You said nearly all of us have interpreted Zelensky at one point.
Right.
There have been cases that we get to hear about of people claiming to work from Ukrainian into other languages who don't really do it properly. I think there was a classic case at the Spanish Parliament, if my memory serves, where the person doing it clearly wasn't a trained interpreter. I mean, is that a problem in the sense that there's a sudden demand? Are sort of perhaps some of the people filling that demand not quite as you would hope them to be?
Yes, of course, because as you mentioned previously yourself, Ukrainian was not such a demanded language. So suddenly it exploded. Everyone needs Ukrainian interpreters. Where do you get them? The interpreters are not born overnight, and qualified interpreters, professional interpreters is less. So yeah, I heard that story about Spanish Parliament. Yeah, I was asked to do that because Spanish is my language as well, but unfortunately I was already busy with something else. So I don't know who did it, but it's probably, the people say they are interpreters, and we have so many interpreters now. Even the people who came from Ukraine fleeing the war, there are very good interpreters among them. As I mentioned before, I worked with them on United 24. But there are some that suddenly appear that we never heard of them. So of course there is a problem. And what I want to stress, that's very important to have good interpreters, qualified interpreters. I think it will take time, but unfortunately Ukraine needs to be heard now, because Ukrainian leaders, President Zelensky, they need to convey very important messages to the world leaders. And, and it's important that latter understand what Ukrainian leaders are saying. The message must be exactly what Ukrainian leaders are saying, not be substituted, altered, misinterpreted. That's terrible. I just read something that's very interesting, and I would like to just tell this. You listen to the speaker, but it is the interpreter you hear, and that's says it all. It's so important, really, what you are saying. So I really hope that our market will self-regulate. I really hope that the administrators, the agency owners, the people responsible for hiring interpreters have some kind of even quick test before they are putting these interpreters to interpret on high-level meetings, because so much is at stake.
Yes, nothing that is said in Ukrainian these days is unimportant, is it? And as you
That's
said,
correct.
in a normal situation, the market would eventually self-regulate, but you do not have the luxury of time.
No, absolutely no. That's a problem. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I know
Okay.
a lot of new interpreters are needed, but still, there are a lot of good interpreters, and I don't see them, for example, in the international organizations. I see the newcomers without experience, but there are many that could have been added, and I don't know why they are not. But okay, I am not responsible for hiring interpreters, unfortunately. Or fortunately, I don't know. I don't like this kind of thing. I like to interpret.
Exactly. No, it's quite difficult. Just to give us a general sort of view of your life as it is at the moment, could you maybe tell us how you spent your last month, where you've been, what you've done? Because from what I can gather, you are quite busy at the moment. Perhaps you
Wow.
can.
Yes. Last month, I can tell you about even last week everywhere, but mostly my trips are between The Hague, Brussels, Strasbourg. Even during last month, no, it was not. I wanted to say that I was twice in New York. No, I was only once in New York for a very short period of time, just 24 hours. uh, yeah, that's mostly what I do. I'll have my assignment now in New York as well, so I'm traveling this afternoon. Uh, yeah, and it's always meeting, it's traveling nonstop, because one day you are in The Hague, the next day you're in Brussels, so you practically come home, you pack something else, and you go back. So my God, that's difficult. That's difficult. But I cannot imagine me doing anything else.
You've spoken about the Hague, going to the Hague.
Yeah.
That suggests that some kind of legal action is being prepared, without going into the fine detail.
But you all hear about it. Our leaders, Ukrainian leaders, world leaders, they talk about it. So it's a possibility to create a special tribunal. So we all know about it.
I think you've covered most of the points. I have a little crib sheet here, and I think you've managed. I think you've covered the point. I didn't have to ask you the questions. I think you sort of managed to do it yourself. Are there any sort of final messages you'd like to put? Is there anything you would like people to know? Any final thoughts that you would like to share?
It's difficult as an interpreter, as a person these days to, just to keep my head straight, to be anything else but interpreter. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing best, and that's why I'm doing that. I would like all of you to understand how important it is now to help Ukraine, to be with Ukraine. I know it is difficult for all of us now. We have crisis, energy crisis, price, etc., etc. But please understand that despite all of this, we still are okay. And if we, as a community, as the world, entire world, don't help Ukraine to win, we will be next. That's unfortunately the truth.
You said at the beginning that it had been your dream when you were young to become an interpreter. My guess is that what you're now doing exceeds those dreams.
Yes, yes, that's true. That's true. Completely true. Yes.
Thank you very much for speaking to me today. I think all of us are very aware that there's a war going on just a few short flying hours away from where we're living at the moment, which is shocking, isn't it? In the 21st century, I think we can all agree that this is shocking. Whatever the rights and wrongs, whatever the background, whatever the history, doesn't seem the way to settle one's disputes. I wish you well. I wish you, what would I call it, stamina, but also I think mental strength, which I think must be very important in the job that you and all the other Ukrainian interpreters do at the moment. And thank you very much for the interview. Enjoy your trip to New York this afternoon. Yes, exactly.
And thank you very much for having me today.
Okay, thank you very much, Ludmila, and all the best. Good luck.
Thank you.